I just was so amazed at who I was, who I really truly was. I wasn't that depressed person that I had become so familiar with. And instead, I had incredible intelligence, incredible capacity, incredible amounts of talents. I saw there how much everybody loved God. We all just wanted so much to be like him. It just was this incredibly supportive, honoring environment. We were all amazing. So my angel got my attention again and redirected my attention back to the room that God was in.
My guest today is JoAnna Oblander. JoAnna, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I am really excited for you to share your NDE and also the incredible experience that you had with your children. I think you have proof that we pick our parents. So I want to start though with the NDE. So I'm going to let you go ahead and share that in any way that you would like to.
Okay. Well, I'll give a little bit of background of what was going on in my life prior to my near-death experience. I started having 24/7 migraines when I was 30 years old. And by the time that I had my near-death experience, I had been having the 24/7 migraines for about 13 years. And I was beat up emotionally and physically. I started having some significant health problems other than the migraines, and I started plunging into severe suicidal depression. I was trying to do everything I could to remedy the headaches, to remedy everything that I was going through. But just prior to those events occurring, my husband and I had completed a foreign adoption of two children from Russia. And so we then had six children. Four of them were teenagers. Two had just learned to speak English after we had adopted them. And when we adopted the two children, in fact, just prior to their adoption, we took on another business. And so we were self-employed, running two businesses, running a family of six kids. And I had been running on adrenaline. And now, as I look back, I'm even amazed that I was able to function as well as I did for as long as I did. But because of the significant and severe depression and all of the health issues, I just started crumbling. I just couldn't keep up with everything. And as a result, we started having financial issues and not being able to take care of all of our bills. And that's one of my personality quirks. I don't like to have money difficulties in any shape or form. And so that was playing on me. And I had a bill collector call me on this one day, and I tried to explain to her what I was going through, that I was fighting the severe depression, that I was having health challenges. I apologized to her. I asked her to please work with me and that I was doing my best to try to get things back on track. And she lit into me and told me that I was this horrible, irresponsible person and that I had the headaches because I wanted to have the headaches, that I was just a person making excuses. And she had all kinds of derogatory comments about my character and the type of person that I was. And as I mentioned before, I was already severely of suicide. And so when she finished her judgments of me and gave me her verbal assessment, I hung up the phone and believed every word that she had shared with me, because that's where my mindset had been in the first place. And I just felt like she confirmed for me everything I had believed about myself. And so I've always been a very spiritual, very religious person. Always have known that God existed. For me, I just have known in my heart that he existed. And I've always talked to him. I've always had conversations with him when I prayed. And so I just knew I was done. I couldn't do it any longer. I couldn't keep doing this to my family. I was convinced that this world and my family would be better off without me, that I was the big albatross burdening everybody's life. And so that night I got down on my knees and I prayed what I thought was going to be my very last prayer ever. And I just told God that I knew that he had blessed me immensely. I knew that I had been blessed with an amazing husband. I knew that he had given me amazing children. I thanked him for them, but that I just couldn't do it any longer. And he knew that I had given it everything I had, and I had nothing more. And I just told him that whatever he chose to do with me the next day would be okay. That I would be attempting to take my life the next day, that if he decided to send me to hell, that was okay. It couldn't be any worse than what I was already going through, but that I hoped that he would welcome me with loving arms. And so then I crawled into bed and cried myself to sleep. And shortly after I fell asleep, an angel appeared above me, and he was reaching out his arm to me, and I knew that he was telling me to grasp his hand, which I did. And he took me from my body. As I grabbed his hand, he pulled my spirit from my body and pulled me into a conduit. And as we traveled through this conduit, I could see all of the stars and the galaxies and everything that is in that realm of outer space, I guess, is the only word I know to call it. But I could see everything outside of the conduit. I could see the walls of the conduit, but they were completely transparent. So I could see everything as we were traveling. And I knew that we were traveling incredible distances in a short amount of time, but I didn't have the sense of travel like we have on Earth. It just was so fast, yet I didn't feel any speed. It was just smooth and peaceful. And my angel, the entire time, he was a little bit to my side and a little bit ahead of me. So he just kept hold of my hand. And in about what seemed to be about 5 to 10 minutes, we arrived at our destination, and I realized that we were in another realm that was a great distance away from Earth. Um, I don't know if it was another planet or if it's what we call heaven or just what it was, but when we arrived there, I could see this whole complex of rooms, and it was enormous. It stretched out for at least several city blocks as far as size. And I recognized this complex. It just was really familiar to me. And I realized that I had been there before. And as I started looking at the rooms in this classroom, I could see that they were classrooms. And I then realized that not only had I been there before, but that I recognized these classrooms. And I knew that the people that were in these classrooms were receiving instruction on what it would be like to have certain experiences on Earth as a mortal. And as I started watching some of the rooms, I could see through the walls and I could hear what was going on in the rooms as I focused on each room. And they just seemed to me like typical classrooms. But as I listened and watched the classrooms, I realized that I even knew what some of the classrooms were all about, what subjects were being taught in them. And I started listening to and watching a couple of the classrooms, and the types of things that were being taught weren't math skills or English or some sort of subject matter like you would take in a regular school setting here. It was, what would it be like to have certain experiences in mortality? What would it be like to have a certain health issue or to have some sort of weakness or some sort of handicap or even some particular type of experience? And I was totally engrossed in that and just amazed as I watched, and I realized that what mattered to everybody in those classrooms was had nothing to do with the kind of things that you typically hear people talk about as far as what they want out of their life. It was nobody cared about whether they were rich or famous, whether they were beautiful or ugly. The only thing that anybody cared about in that situation was how effective would it be in helping them to learn to be like God? How how well would it help them to learn to love, to be compassionate, to serve others? And I remember watching two men that sat side by side, and in that classroom, they were being taught about what it would be like to have cystic fibrosis. And the man looked to his friend and he said, I think this is a great fit. I think this would work really well for me. And I just remember watching and listening to that and thinking, does he have any idea what he is choosing for himself, knowing the little bit that I know about cystic fibrosis? But again, the criteria that we were utilizing had nothing like the criteria that we utilize in this world. It wasn't, they didn't care how long they lived. They didn't care if they lived just a few years or lived to be an old age. It was just what would help them be most like God. And at that point, my angel got my attention. He realized I had become engrossed in watching those classrooms. And he motioned for me to look to my left towards another room. And as I looked at that room, I could see through the walls of that room just like I could the other classrooms. But this room was not a classroom. It was a room that just had one individual in it. And as I looked at him from behind his face was turned away from me, and all I could see was his backside. But even from his backside, I immediately recognized him, and I knew that God was in that room. And as I watched him, I could see that he was watching the door of the room that he was in, and he could see through the walls too. And I could tell he could see, just like I could see, that there were two individuals approaching that room. And so he then started moving towards that door to greet the people who were coming to the door. And as he did, I had all of my memories of that realm restored to me. I remembered everything that I had been a part of. I remembered everybody that I had known. I remembered all of the things about myself. And I began to experience my experience there in that realm, both from a mortal perspective and from an eternal perspective. And as I saw and was reunited with what I call the real me, I just was so blown away. I just was so amazed at who I was, who I really truly was. I wasn't that depressed person that I had become so familiar with. And um, instead, I had incredible intelligence, incredible capacity, incredible um, amounts of talents. I can't tell you now what those talents were, but um, and I just saw all of our interactions with each other, and I was just so amazed at the love that existed there, the truth that permeated everything, the love that permeated everything. And I was just so astounded by how everybody was so different, yet we didn't care that somebody was different than us. We just honored each other in a way that you just never experience here in this world. If somebody didn't have as many talents, we didn't care. We just applauded them. We just honored them. We just honored every new thing that they learned. They honored every new thing that we learned. It just was this incredibly supportive, honoring environment. And I saw there how much everybody loved God so much and basked in his love for them. And we all just wanted so much to be like him, to honor him, to honor his existence by making the very most of what we were and and of what we could become. And as I watched that, again, I became just totally enamored with what I was seeing and was just just so filled with wonder at what I was seeing of myself and everyone else, and seeing that even though my talents and my abilities and my personality were different than everyone else's, that we were all amazing. It wasn't like I was this star pupil in the class or anything similar. It was just we were all amazing. And so my angel got my attention again and redirected my attention back to the room that God was in. And I started looking again at that room and saw him open the door and greet the two individuals who were at the door. And I was amazed to see that the two individuals who were at the door was myself and my now husband, Greg. But in that realm, we were not married. But somehow I knew as I watched that my husband, Greg, and I, that plans had already been put in place for our mortal experience, and that it had already been planned that we would be together in this world. And as God greeted us, he gave each of us just a warm embrace. And as he embraced me and thanked me for coming, I just wanted to stay in his arms and feel his love. But from that point, I began to experience that meeting, both as it had occurred previously. I knew as I was watching it that I was being shown an event that had happened prior to my birth on earth. But I began to experience it as I had felt when I experienced it originally, but also observing it from beside my angel. And there were only two chairs in the room, and God directed us towards the chair, and he had Greg stand behind me, behind my chair, and had me sit down across from him. And we were so close together, um, and faced each other that he was able to easily hold my hands. And as I sat down, Greg began to massage my shoulders, and somehow I knew from his cues that he knew what this meeting was about. He knew why God had asked me to come and asked him to come with me. And I knew somehow that he had been a part of the planning for this meeting. And so as he rubbed my shoulders, I just knew that he was trying to comfort me and let me know that it would be okay. And one of the things that I will say about that realm is that we just have so much confidence there, so much faith in our ability to accomplish good things. And so I was a little surprised that he was massaging my shoulders and trying to comfort me, because that just wasn't a typical experience, at least in that realm. And so God then sat in the chair across from me, and he held my hands, and he thanked me for coming. And he explained to me that he had a special mission for me, um, in mortality. And he explained everything that would be a part of that experience, in great detail. And he then had me look through the conduit that my angel had brought me through. And it was though the conduit was significantly shortened. I was able to look from where I was sitting through that conduit as though I was really only looking a short distance away. And I was shown what my life would look like if I accepted the assignment that God was asking me to accept. And I understood that everything that I was being shown was conditional. I understood that never, ever would my ability to choose be taken away from me, that I would always have the ability to make choices, and nobody could take that from me. And if I were to reject God and to not lean upon his guidance, that what I was seeing would change. I wasn't shown how it would change. I wasn't shown all the different variables of different ways that my life could change and play out. But what I was shown was how my life would proceed so long as I leaned upon God and his guidance. And I don't know everything that I was shown of my life, but I know that there were things that obviously left that were disturbing to me, because my initial reaction was actually one of trepidation. I just was so concerned by what I was being asked to do that I was afraid that I would fail. And God was able to read my mind, and he knew that I was having concerns, and I just wanted so much to please him and so much to honor him that I thought maybe it would be better to refuse the assignment and make sure that someone else took it, so that we could be sure that whatever it was that I would accomplish for God would be accomplished. And he was able to read my mind again, and he always can read my mind, but he told me, he said, I would never ask you to take upon any assignment or mission that I didn't know you could succeed at. He said, as long as you remember me, you will succeed. And he told me he knew that the assignment that he was asking me to take on would be difficult, it would be challenging, but he knew that as long as I trusted in him and followed him, that I would succeed. He expressed to me that he would never, ever uh, initiate something that with the intention of causing failure, that his only intention whatsoever was to accomplish his purposes, and that he knew that I could absolutely do it. And several times he squeezed my hands gently and told me, as long as you remember, you will succeed. As long as you remember me, you will succeed. And I realized that what he was telling me was true, that he knew my capacity, my abilities even better than I did. And so I then accepted the mission that he asked me to accept. And he squeezed my hands again and smiled at me, and he said, thank you. He said, you have chosen well, and thank you for your willingness to serve me. And with that, the meeting was over, and our eyes stood to leave, and he stood and he gave me another hug and embraced me. And expressed his love. And I didn't want to leave his arms again. I just didn't want to leave him or to leave his love. But after he was done embracing me, then we started to leave the room. And from that point, I was returned to my body, but not shown the return trip. I just found myself back in my body and realized what had happened. And I had hoped that when I returned to my body, um, that I would be healed, that I would not have the 24/7 migraines or the severe depression, but I returned to the very same body that was still depressed and that was still having the 24/7 migraines. But because of that experience, I just knew I had to hold on. And it was really, really difficult, many days. Um, and I was eventually blessed with healing. That's a whole nother story of divine intervention, but I am here and I held on and I was able to overcome the severe depression and the headaches. And now I'm just working on all the things that I feel like God is pushing me to do.
Wow. That was quite the experience, very detailed. So that's the first thing I want to ask you about. So you didn't have a traditional near-death experience like somebody does when they're in the hospital and their heart stops and they leave their body, or car wreck, but I do believe that these experiences are equally as real. But how was this different than a dream? Because you said that you went to sleep and then this happened. How was this different than a dream?
Well, I can tell you that I've had dreams that God has given me, and they're different from regular dreams for sure. Um, God has shown me different things, but um, I don't know how to explain how I know. I just do. It wasn't a dream. I felt my spirit leave my body. Um, what I saw, I don't even think anybody could begin to imagine, especially in my mindset at that time. I could have never imagined that I would have been able to do the things that I did while I was gone.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that that's one of the barometers for mine as well. When I was out of my body, I don't have any human experience that I can even match it to. It's not something I could have ever imagined or conceived of. And I think that that's a pretty good barometer. And then, like you said, it doesn't even matter what anybody else thinks about it. You know how real it was. So it's not even something you focus on because it doesn't matter if anybody else believes it or not.
Right. Yeah. And I do want people to know it's real, but if they don't, I know it's real. And so um one of the things that I've seen other near-death experiencers express is that what they experienced was more real than this earth or this world is real. And that's something that when I hear that, it's like I totally relate to that because quite honestly, now, since the time I had my near-death experience, um, that's a challenge I have because that's so real to me. That's so real in my heart and in my understanding that I just look around everything that's going on in my life and I think, what does it matter? This isn't really as real as that anyway. you know?
It definitely makes things a little bit less significant, the problems
Yeah,
that we label as problems, right?
right. Yeah, and and I don't mean to minimize,
Yeah.
what goes on in this world in any way, but for me it just your your priorities just get straightened out, I guess, is maybe the best way I know how to, you just realize, okay, this experience is meant to teach me something. This experience is supposed to help me become more loving or more compassionate or more whatever. Let's just get through it, and let's just use God's assistance through this, and in the end I get to, I just can't wait to go back.
Yeah, I think I hear that a lot. Okay, I'm going to go to the beginning of your NDE and I want to talk about the angel. So, can you describe what this angel looked like?
Well, yes and no. So one of the things that I found myself wondering about after my near-death experience was why my angel didn't face me for any great length of time. Um, I, my husband and I had seen our children prior to their births, and so, and the age of their spirits when they appeared to us was, I would say, 30-ish, between the age of 25 and 30-ish, as adults. And that was the same age um, range that I would say that angel appeared to me. But what was confusing to me was why he never faced me for very long, why he always kept his face away from me as much as possible. And so I actually prayed about it after my near-death experience and asked, who was my angel? Because he never identified himself. He never told me who he was. We really didn't have any conversations. It was just that had held out his hand, his arm to me, and I had grabbed it, and he had taken me through the conduit and directed my attention. But other than that, and so what I had revealed to me was that it was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. And once I knew who he was, it just made all the sense in the world to me. My grandpa was probably as much or more of a dad to me than my own dad. He and my grandmother, his wife, had just been, they hadn't raised me or anything, but they had just been my support system growing up. And I realized that had he looked at me for any length of time, if I had identified who he was, I never would have paid attention to what he was showing me. I would have been so consumed with just spending time with him, just being with him, that I wouldn't have paid attention to anything else. And
Okay,
so
that makes sense. Yeah.
he looks he looks like my grandpa at about 30 years old. And of course, I don't think I ever knew my grandpa. No, I never knew my grandpa at that age, but my grandpa, just like in mortality, was a tall man, tall, lanky, and just one of the sweethearts of my life.
So you describe it as angel and not spirit guide. So how are you making a differentiation?
I don't think I really am. I think either term could be used. I just think that for me, because I know that my grandpa continues to assist me from time to time, I just think of him not being as my spirit guide. I think of him as my angel.
So wings or no wings?
No,
Okay.
no
And
wings.
I've heard lots of people make, you know, assessments and talk about angels without wings as well. So, all right, I want to talk about the classroom. So, who did you see in these classrooms? Were these children? Were these 30
No,
something year olds? Were there a bunch of people, a small amount? What was in this classroom?
there were no children, at least no. Um, in the realm that I was in, I didn't, to my knowledge, a lot of what I was shown um, has been kept from my memory again. Like I know the what I was shown, but I couldn't tell you the particulars of exactly who I saw. I can identify a few. Obviously, I saw my husband and a few things like that. But in the classrooms, I don't know that I specifically knew who I was seeing, but they all appeared to be of adult size. And I would say that 30-ish range again. Um, and they just were in the classrooms receiving instructions. I could see that there were usually two or three instructors that were overseeing each classroom, and each of the classrooms had a varying amount of individuals in them. Some of them seemed to be fairly full classrooms, and some of them not so full, like maybe 12, 15 in one room, and maybe 30, 40, 50 in another room.
So, do you think as these people are in these classrooms that they are new souls, meaning new to an earthly experience? Because the way that you're describing them is that they're trying to understand things that they're going to go through in their earthly experience.
So what they were trying to do was to understand what those experiences would be like, and they were in the process of choosing some of those experiences.
Interesting. So you said that they were looking at weaknesses, illnesses, and handicaps. And here you are with this debilitating headache that you've been suffering with at this point in time for many, many years. Do you think that they were showing you this as a reminder that this is something that you chose?
I think there's a high probability of that, yes. But I also think that I was being shown um, that there was a huge amount of preparation on our part for this world. That it's not just as random as some would believe.
Oh, I've heard lots of NDEers talk in great detail about the nuances of every aspect of what their human body looked like, felt like how long, how tall they were, what kind of abilities or disabilities, what the weaknesses would be emotionally, physically, all of it, because it all lends to a certain experience, right?
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. You said at some point in time, all of your memories were restored and that there was everything that you had known you remembered. So, was this your first? Is this your, as JoAnna right now? Is this your first earthly experience that you think your soul has had?
Yeah, I believe that there is only one experience in mortality.
Oh, interesting. I I very rarely hear that from an NDEer. Tell me why you believe that.
Um, because as a part of that experience, which I don't share too very often, I was shown um, the uh, what some call a war, but I call a great debate, in which I saw um, each of us choosing whether we would follow um, Jesus or whether we would follow Satan. And one of the things that I saw was myself choosing to um, to I would argue is not the right word, but to talk to a large group of people, um, to talk to the, to share with them all the reasons why we needed to follow Jesus. And one of those most important reasons was that he would grant us free will, and that if we followed Satan, we really weren't going to grow because he was going to force us. He would not give us choice. And I knew and I understood in that realm that without choice, there is no growth. That, we can do a certain activity or do a certain thing, but if it's not of our own choice, the effect is totally different than if we're forced to do something. And I personally believe that Jesus did come to this world as the Savior. And I don't believe that his sacrifice was necessary if we were just going to be reincarnated.
Okay, so now I have to get into this then. So this might be a little bit more controversial, but
All
I
right.
need to talk about free will here. So I too have been on the other side. And when I was coming back into my human body, I at that time had a puppy that was 8 weeks old who had started biting. And I'm coming back with the power of the other side. Like I'm energetically more powerful than anything you ever experience in this human body. And I remember thinking about my puppy and thinking, oh, wow, I'm so powerful right now. Like if I want to, I can skip that puppy biting and I can just tell her, cause her to stop doing that. And it was almost like a hand came down and slapped me. It wasn't physical or anything, but that's kind of the feeling. And it was an instant jolt of you'll negate the game. If you take away the free will, the game is over. It makes no sense. There's no point to it. It's negated. That's what was understood by me. So now I have to go back to what you've just said, because you said free will is the ability to make choices, right?
Right.
So if you are told by a God that you have to either follow a devil or follow a God, then how in the world are you making any free will choice if you're given a condition that if you, I think you said this goes from if you're close to God, then there is no failure. So you're being told that there's no failure, but it's almost setting you
No.
up for the free will. So how is there free will if you know that there's going to be failure? Because I didn't think that there was any judgment, at least from hundreds of NDEs that I've talked to, they
Right.
come back saying no judgment. So I'm just trying to understand this nuance because that part doesn't
So,
make sense to me.
okay. So maybe the best way that I can explain it is that I think that God is more merciful, more forgiving, more understanding than we will ever be, as a mortal. Um, I do think that once we are back in his presence, um, that it will be much easier to be like him because we're so surrounded with that love that exists in that realm. But in I wasn't forced to choose anything there. I was given my free will, and that for me is something that is consistent between that existence and this existence is that, um, and I realize that there are some people in this world who end up in situations where you would have to say that their ability to really make life choices is very compromised. Um, but I know that we always have the ability to choose our attitude. We always have our ability to choose how we decide to look at a situation or to choose our our outlook. And so why I was supporting Jesus was because I knew that that's when that debate was taking place. Um, we were making decisions about the ultimate destiny of this world, and we we all knew, I think, to at least most of us, that in order to truly grow, in order to truly advance and progress, we needed to have choice. And so we weren't made to make that choice. We were able to decide that, okay, no, we're not going to have a choice. But I also believe, and this is just a personal belief, I can't say that I remember it from my near-death experience, that the ones who chose to follow after Satan, I believe, ended up negating their ability to come to this world.
So everybody then that chose to come here would all be following God.
Well, you don't have to, but they
But you
have, we
said that
all,
they wouldn't be able to, they would negate the ability to come here. So that would mean that they
well,
wouldn't be
no,
here
so
only.
just that they wouldn't have the ability to experience mortality, but anybody who comes here has free will. We can choose to reject God, we can choose to accept him, we can choose to be, in the middle, riding a fence. It's we can choose to believe in the goodness that exists here, or we can choose to see nothing but bad. We just always have the ability to choose.
Right. Except you said that God said to you that you can't fail if you remember God. And he said that
No,
multiple
he said,
times.
as long as I remember him, which meant as long as I used his assistance, as long as I remembered him, I would not fail. So as long as I used his help, as long as I looked to him for guidance, I would not fail. It doesn't mean that I would never have any experience in which I didn't fail or not succeed to the extent that I would hope that I would succeed. But in the ultimate sense, as long as I looked to him for guidance, I would ultimately succeed in whatever that mission was that he was asking me to accept.
Yeah, I guess I'm still just kind of, I'm still so confused because when I hear you're going, like, if you don't remember God, then you failed. So you used the free will, but you didn't remember. And then you don't go back to heaven. You go
No,
where?
I don't think it has anything to do with whether I return to heaven or not.
Okay, that sounds more like an NDE.
Yeah, yeah, no, it doesn't. That's not what is at stake. It's whatever I was asked to do for him in this
I
world.
see. So that was very specific to what you
Right,
gotcha.
right.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay. What's interesting when you got to look through the conduit and you said it was shortened, you reminded me so much of Peter Panagor's experience. He had a similar experience where he was able to look into the earthly experience from the heaven side and see things at a short distance. And I thought that that was interesting. I've only ever heard that one other time.
I've never heard of him. So
Oh, interesting. I interviewed him several years ago. He has a really incredible NDE as well.
I'll have to
All
get
right,
his
so let's go back and
information
talk
on.
about Oh, I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I said I'll have to get his information so that I can,
Yeah,
I like
I'll
to
make a note
listen
to
to
link
those
that
experiences.
experience in the I can put like a little card that people can click on if they want to hear his experience. It's a pretty good one too. All right, let's talk about God because a lot of times when I talk to people who have an NDE, they don't experience God in a human form. They experience it as an energy or a light or something. So it's not very often I've had the chance to talk to somebody who had a God experience where God looked like a human. So we will explain how he looked and I guess how you recognized that it was God.
Number one, the only way that I can explain that I recognized that it was him is that I obviously must have seen him in that form before. Because when I initially saw him, I saw him from the backside. He was facing away from me, but even his outline I recognized from a distance. Um, and I, that's just how I now see him in my mind, and when I looked at him, as I sat across from him, um, I was just amazed at how perfect he was. He was just completely perfect without, he just was not missing anything that was good. And I can't say that his face was like the most handsome, most beautiful face I had ever seen because I haven't been allowed to remember what his face looked like. What I do remember is how I felt as I looked at his face and how I felt in his presence and just how amazed that that any being could be so whole and so complete and all-knowing, but he was.
And did he appear in his 30s also like everybody else?
Yes.
Interesting. I've always said if I got to be any age I want to be, I'd be 37 forever. That was like my perfect age. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you?
You know, my migraines started at about 30, so I would go back to somewhere between 25 and 30.
I get that. Okay, you said intelligence, but you said it wasn't like normal intelligence. I've said the same thing. Like, it's not like you know these formulas or you know the biology or the history of the earth. It's more than that. But can you elaborate and explain a little bit by what you mean? Because I know you weren't able to bring it all back, but at least you got to
Right.
experience it.
Don't I wish I could have brought it
I
back.
know. I think it would ruin the game.
It would, but it still would be awesome.
So it'd be awesome. I agree.
It's hard to describe. I just I just knew that my grasp of things. So like what I'll do is I'll make a comparison. In this life, um, going through school, science was not a biggie with me. It's just like, oh, how can I avoid that? And there it was like my grasp of all things was just so expansive. It wasn't like limited to a subject matter per se. It just was the complete understanding that I had was so immense and so far reaching, so much more than we're limited to as mortals. And I that's the only way I know how to describe it.
Yeah. Wow. I I love people listening to this because I've been saying for so many years on this show, you are such a powerful soul. Like every single one of you. If you could see for just a second the power and beauty and magnificence and love that you were on the other side, you would never have an unkind word that you would even think about yourself.
Right.
So did that change when you came back? Because it's hard to be in a depression and then come back from this feeling of immense knowledge and love, and it's got to permeate somehow.
It does, and it has, but I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't struggle.
Oh, right,
Um,
because we're still human. Yes.
right. And so that's one of the things that I constantly remind myself of because, you can get immersed in the daily grind, so to speak. And it's like, wait a minute. And that's one of the things that I have learned, and I think from talking to you, you probably have as well, is it's like you just have no idea who we are, like, and so when I'm talking to myself and I go, oh, Joe, why did you do that? Why, and I'm being hard on myself, it's like, wait a minute, that's not how I should talk to myself. Instead, give myself some grace, give myself some mercy, find a way to give myself credit for what I have done as opposed to beating myself up for what I didn't do or what I didn't succeed as well at as I wanted to. And I tell my friends and my family the same thing. It's just like, stop, quit beating yourself up. You don't know who you're talking to. And as I told you before, we saw our kids, and so I know personally how amazing they're they are and were prior to them coming to this world. And it's like, you may not know that. You may not have seen, you don't remember who you are, but I remember who you are. And you've got to be kinder to yourself. You've got
Mm.
to loosen up on all that self-criticism.
Definitely. Such good advice. And since you mentioned it, I've been waiting to hear about this because it's such a, oh my gosh, such a cool experience you had with understanding without a doubt that our children pick us. So you and Greg had an incredible shared experience around your children. So will you explain what this happened? Because this sounds like this was before your NDE.
It was many years before my NDE. So shortly after my husband and I were married, um, we were in the habit of saying prayers together at night. And we kneeled down beside our bed this one night. And quite typically, in that period of my life, I would not kneel on my knees because I had a very bad low back from a gymnastics accident in high school. And so that wasn't usually the most comfortable position. And my husband had said, hey, I don't know why, but I feel like we both need to be on our knees tonight. And I said, okay, I was fine with that. And so we knelt down together beside our bed to say our prayers. And as we did, um, we both essentially saw the same thing. Only my husband saw actually more of it than I did, but um, we saw four spirits or angels standing at the end of our bed, close together, um, two male and two female. And then a male spirit stood in the doorway of our bedroom, and they were glorious. They were just the power, the strength, and the light that emanated from them was just amazing. And nothing was said to us. There was no conversation um, with them. We just saw them. And the only difference that my husband saw was that he saw them enter the room. I didn't see them until they were in place at the end of our bed and in front of the door. And I initially didn't know who they were, but I suspected because they stood in what I perceived to be couples. And I could tell that each couple had a bond, a strong bond with each other. And so I assumed that they might be deceased grandparents and that the male spirit might have been an escort of some sort. And so when we finished our prayers and got back into bed, both of us kind of looked at each other, not knowing if each of us had just seen the same thing, but we just said, "Did you see? And did you see?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, I, and I described to my husband what I had seen, and he said, "Do you know who they were?" And I said, "No." I said, "I'm guessing they might have been our grandparents." And he looked at me and he goes, "No, those were our children." And as soon as he told me that, there's just this warm feeling overcame me. And I knew not only had I seen my children, but that they had stood in the order that they would be born, and that the female spirit that stood closest to our bed was the first one that was going to be born. And then it would be the boy and the boy and the girl, which it was more like a woman, man, man, woman. And so we know that this had to have occurred approximately between the time we got married and within 3 months of us getting married, because our oldest daughter was born 2 weeks after our first anniversary. And then the other three followed along. Um, were all born within a 6.5 year span.
Wow. So tell us about the one standing back in the doorway, the one that you thought that was the escort.
So the one that we initially thought might be the escort ended up being our son Andrew, that I was told to find several years later when my youngest daughter was about 5 years old. I was told that I had a son and that I must find him. And then a few months later, at this time when I was told to find Andrew, I was having the migraines, and I was afraid that the migraines would prevent us from having a successful adoption study. So we had decided that we would focus um, on getting me remedied, hopefully, try to find the cure, if you will, for my headaches. And a couple of months later, the voice spoke to me again, and it said the same thing. It said, "You have a son and you must find him. His name is Andrew. He is in Romania and you must teach him his heritage." And that involved a lot of different experiences and a 6.5 year search. But we found him and his sister in Russia. He was actually not even born when I was told to find him. He was still in his mother, who is of Romanian ancestry.
Just can't make this stuff up.
No, you can't. I don't have that good of an imagination. If I did, I don't even know what I would do with it. It would just, but yeah, no, you
I'm
can't.
I'm curious. Your husband Greg, you said that he even saw them walk into that experience. Was this so vivid for you or for Greg that the images of what they look like were kind of burned into your memory?
I wouldn't say that the images of what they looked like. I can't say that I can remember their facial features from that experience extremely well. I can remember their heights. I knew what size they were going to be as adults because I just knew that their heights um, were the heights that they would be here. I don't know why I knew that, but I just did. And my oldest son was the tallest, and my husband's fairly tall. He's about 6'2", 6'3", and my oldest son is like 6'4", 6'5". Um, and because the girls were separated, I thought that they were going to be closer in height than they actually are. Not that they're neither of them is short. I'm 5'9", so I'm not short as a woman either, but my oldest daughter is 5'7". My youngest daughter is 5'10". So,
Wow.
but yeah, I knew the kind of physical characteristics that they would have for sure.
Wow. Well, these are incredible experiences, and I would imagine that there are people who are watching who might have questions. So, is there a way that people can connect with you?
I do have a Facebook page. I have a website. Um, it's JoAnna Oblander on my Facebook page. It's JoAnnaOblander.com for my website.
Will you spell it for the people who are listening?
You bet. It's JoAnnaOB as in boy, LAND as in dog, ER.com.
Perfect. Well, I have one last question I want to ask you, which is, Joe, what do you think you know for sure?
What I know for sure is that there is an amazing plan in place for this world, for each of us. And if we choose, we each have amazing things and wonderful things that we are meant to accomplish in this life. We have amazing things we're meant to learn in this life. And I feel like we're meant to make amazing contributions to this world and to those that we come into contact with, both our families, our friends, and even the strangers we come across every day.
Yeah, I agree. All right. My dog has been whining. She just wants to come and say hello. Every once in a
Well,
while, she wants to come
hello.
and make an appearance. And I feel like dogs are best examples of pure love. And I don't know if she just
Yes.
loves me so much or she's super hungry right now because it's really late for her to be eating. I'm not sure, but she's going to be one on Saturday. I've had her for
Oh, happy birthday.
a few months now. Such a good girl. Well, anyway, JoAnna, thank you. Thank you so much for wanting to come on and share your beautiful experience and your experience of your children picking you as parents. I love all of it. And mostly, I wanted to just thank you for what you are doing to help wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, in fact, I have a children's book I'm about to release.
Oh, how exciting. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so I wrote my my Glimpse of Heaven book. You realize I have a book, right, that I wrote?
No, because you didn't mention it when I said, how can people work with you and find you?
Okay, so they can get my book on Amazon. It's A Glimpse of Heaven, one woman's life-altering visit with God. And then the children's book that I'm in the final stages of preparing is called Where Did Grandpa Go? One of the things that I'm aware of, very much so, especially after my near-death experience, is that we have loved ones on the other side assisting us all the time.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the same ones every day, but that they're assisting us and they're aware of us and they love us and they do what they can. They don't ever take away our free will, but they do what they can to help us. And so I've created this book that is meant to be a series. There will be other books coming that show a grandpa dying and then show him being their angel to his family, helping them, supporting them, cheering them on in all of their daily activities that they're involved in.
Beautiful. I'm so glad you remembered to share that.
I am too. So yeah, and that will hopefully, I don't know the time frame. I've got a few things that I've got to do with the logistics of the book, but hopefully within the next month or two, that will be available for on both my website and on Amazon.
Excellent. Well, Blaze is making a little appearance.
And what is his name?
Her name is Blaze. Blazing Star
Mm.
is her full name, and she will be
Oh,
one
hi,
in like
Blaze.
4 days. But I love when she makes an appearance. So,
Yes.
so JoAnna, I want to thank you so much. Thank you for coming on, for sharing your beautiful experience, for sharing information about what you got to see with your children, proving that they do pick their parents. And mostly, I want to thank you so much for what you are doing to wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
Thank you. Thank you for
And
what you're doing.
oh, thank you. And of course, this show is absolutely nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, to listen, and to share these beautiful experiences with somebody who needs it. And if you still have questions, you can join me for Wake Up Wednesdays live on 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'm Laurie Majka. If you like stories that open your heart and expand your soul, hit subscribe. This channel is Waking Up the Collective.